So I want to talk today about something that I've been thinking about quite a lot recently. This talk will be somewhat theoretical, somewhat philosophical, but I think we've seen enough code for one night, so let's keep it high level for now.
Sorry.
It's all right, buddy. So I'm Jani. I work at Formidable Labs. And what I do basically day to day is I help companies construct user interfaces mainly in JavaScript. And as part of this, I've been doing this for a very long time, for about 15 years. I've built UIs for web and for mobile and for desktop and for embedded devices and for industrial harvesters and a number of things. And so I've been looking at this UI thing for a little bit. And I want to start with just a little bit of history, starting from the web. And then we're going to cover actually user interfaces in general, not only related to the web. So I'm going to take you to a place a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. And by long time, I mean long in JavaScript years, so about 10 years ago. Does anybody remember this time called the Framework Wars? So this is a completely fictional delineation that I just came up with. It's not really, we've been talking about this for a long time, but web was a really weird place to work in. So from about 2008 to about maybe, last year, a couple of years ago, there was this constant arms race between, developers developing both applications, but also developing better tools to develop applications. So I personally went from XJS to Dojo to Backbone to Angular to Ember to React. And then there was this kind of, really intense period of time when we couldn't really decide how we want to build applications. And I think many people still, if you go to medium.com and you read blog posts, a lot of people still seem to believe that this is the case, that JavaScript developers still can't make up their minds. But to be honest, I kind of disagree with that. I think we currently live in an unprecedented era of prosperity and peace when it comes to JavaScript development. The tools that we have in our disposal today are just incredible. It doesn't matter really which ones you choose, whether it's Ember or React or even Angular for that matter. You can actually be really productive at what you do. And as UI engineers, as people who want to focus on product and want to focus on great user interfaces, we get to actually do that, and the tools are no longer standing in our way. And no matter which tool you pick, there isn't really that much pressure to change because they're all pretty good. And myself, I've primarily been working with React for the last 4 years. And having come back off this framework war, I keep asking myself, why is it that I'm stuck on this one thing? Am I just too old to know what the new kids are doing these days? Is there some other thing going out there that I have no idea what it is? But I think it's just a Tetris effect. It's the idea that you keep doing the same thing for a long time, and then you kind of get stuck on your brain. And I think we are currently in a period where we don't need to worry about the tools. But sadly, I'm afraid that this won't be the case forever. I think there's one thing that is guaranteed, and that is that change is always a constant. Change will always happen because smart people won't stop seeing problems in the world. They won't stop with coming up solutions for them. People won't be, stop being frustrated with, whatever is the diminishing slice of frustrating things that are still about our tools, and we'll keep inventing new things. And no matter how hard we want to bury our heads in sand, we kind of need to take advantage of these new tools. And the idea there is that with this process of change, this process of constant evolution, it's called innovation. We could certainly stop, innovating, and we could also stop adapting to innovation. We could just say, all right, tools are good enough for now. And that kind of seems attractive sometimes. It seems attractive for us to say, all right, I'm happy with this. I don't want to think about anything else. But if you take a longer term view, you look 5 years ahead, 10 years ahead. If you don't adapt, then you're going to be exactly where you are today. But 10 years down the line, you're actually going to get really far, and we're all really going to get far together. But the best thing that we can hope that the tools that we use is a system that is fit to adapt to change, because the only alternative is basically a revolution. It's a new outbreak of war. And this is basically built into the innovation, DNA of innovation itself. It's really cycles of revolutions and refinements. first, we start with basically a big burst of progress, whether this is invention of a new framework, invention of a new tool. There's going to be a really, really intense period where we essentially we are challenging some kind of status quo, and we're picking the low-hanging fruit. And there's going to be this longer period of refinement where we basically take that idea that we have and we keep working on it until we basically can no longer find any gains to be had, and we basically plateau. And the problem is that these revolutions, they don't come cheap. When you start somewhere, you basically peaked. You can no longer extract anything new. If you want to go further, you want to adopt a new methodology, you're essentially going to enter this dip. From a personal point of view, this looks like you need to learn new things. All the tips and tricks that you have will no longer necessarily be relevant. But worst of all, in this kind of ecosystem where we are using open source tools, where there's massive amounts of engineering effort and documentation effort gone into the tools that we use, that all becomes lost. If anybody did Angular 1, and then they decided that, all right, well, we need to now move on to something else, they know what this feels like. It's a very, very costly thing for your business and also for you as an engineer and the community at large. So what we want to do is we want to keep innovating in a way that doesn't mean that we need to discard all our existing tools. So when change happens, and it always does, our tools can either snap under the force of change, or they can be flexible enough to bend into it. And if the systems are large and monolithic, if they're rigid structures, they're really hard to move and to reorder. What we want is a system that can sustain change in a way that doesn't prevent innovation. So what we want is something like a primitive, like an interoperability primitive that allows us to essentially keep innovating in a way that doesn't break the whole. For example, if you want to change the data layer, you shouldn't have to change the way your UI is architected. Or if you want to change the way you deal with CSS, you shouldn't have to change your UI composition. Or if you want to write code to iOS or Android or VR or whatever it is, you shouldn't necessarily have to discard all your existing patterns and practices. So what we need is a system of loose coupling with high interop. And so where do we go to look for such a tool? If we evaluate the tools and frameworks that we have today available to us against this particular criteria, I think there's one tool that satisfies it for me. And to me, that is essentially React components. And I'm not here to incite a framework riot. I'm not here to get people angry or try to sell you anything or try to sell you on React. What I want to talk about is certain qualities of React and the way I've been thinking about this that makes it really suitable for future forward development. And then whether or not you want to use React or you want to use something else, maybe you can take these qualities and evaluate your own work against them. So the first quality of React components is that they're composable. It has this. How many people here know React? Approximately. I guess most people. Can I have who has no idea what React is? All right, cool. Sorry, buddy. So React is basically a very simple idea of it has this concept of a component. It takes some data in and it renders out some UI. And then it can also have some internal state that it can update, and then the component will reactively update. Maybe I should have had some code here, but I don't. But having this single component interface allows us to arbitrarily combine and recombine different libraries, different ideas. So it has a single unit of code that we basically interface that we can operate against. The other quality that we want from our whatever the interop primitive would be, whether it's React component or something else, we ideally would want it to be functional, because this functional style of programming, props in, renderables out, makes React components really robust and the behavior really easy to document and understand. And developers can use components without knowing actually how they work. And this leads into the second kind of second very useful quality, which is that the components are encapsulated, not only in the classical, object-oriented programming sense of encapsulation where you keep some data in, but they actually encapsulate the entire set of behaviors. They encapsulate the data that the component needs. They encapsulate the behavior, which this could be, it could be event handlers, the logic for rendering, and it also encapsulates the styles of it. So you can essentially move these blocks of code, and you can do whatever you want with them. And it's not a unique quality to React. To a certain extent, Ember has this concept, although we'll talk in a bit how it's maybe a bit different. Vue definitely has this, but what I'm saying is that React just does this in a very, very, good way. And I think that this last quality, this is the quality where I think like React has done something very right, is that it has a single abstraction that is multi-purpose. If you look at traditional MVC frameworks, it has separation between a controller and a view. Or if you look at like any kind of Angular thing, it has all these like different parts of it that are kind of hard to individually replace, but also really hard to compose. But in React, your component can be a controller, it can be a view, it can be a higher order component, which is a function that component that returns a component. There's a number of things to it that allows that single abstraction to work. And I think that talk by Lucas earlier was a good example of it, like function composition. The fact that you can, like essentially have a single abstraction and you can reason about code in a way that you can compose them in like 100 different ways is the true kind of evolutionarily, or the revolutionary thing that is different in React from anything else that came before. But putting all these things together, like React components to me are not just a UI primitive. They're not just an interop primitive. To me, React components are an innovation primitive. If you've used React, if you know what it is, you're probably familiar with libraries like Redux or Apollo or style components or any of these things. And these are massive innovations that have happened over the last 3 or so years. And they've been created by a global community of people who don't really know each other. Well, they do know now because they go to all the same conferences, but at the time they weren't aware of each other's existence in any way. And I as a developer, you as a developer can take advantage of this innovation without breaking everything else that you're doing so far. And to me, this is just insane. But anyway, so having this single innovation primitive that is interoperable, but also just like very flexible, I think this is what will make React future forward. And I like React, but this is not me telling you to use React again. This is me saying that we finally found a tool that is this good. But one more React thing before we go into the general purpose part of this talk is I think the best example of this kind of React's sort of like good qualities is the universality of it. So basically, when we talk about React, everything that we've said so far, it's been within the context of web development. I've compared it to Vue or Angular or like whatever framework it is. And this is what we call React DOM. It's basically just React that renders to the DOM, renders to the document object model in the browser. There's also React Native, which is, like many of you may have heard about this, but it's a way for you to write bog standard React applications that essentially, instead of instrumenting DOM nodes, they instrument native views, iOS views or Android views. And so here we already start to see a little bit of the the beginnings of the idea of like universal user interface programming model that has all these great qualities to it that by my thesis is future forward, but also like spans other kinds of revolutions, spans other kinds of changes in like whether or not our platforms tomorrow are going to be mobile or whether they're going to be VR or AR. React like exists already on all these platforms today. But let's take it one step forward. There's this library, React Native Web. Does anybody use Twitter here? Do you use the Twitter mobile PWA? So that's actually a React Native web application today. It's a React Native-ish code base that renders to the web browser, and it essentially, the code that you use as a developer, it's views and texts and like this kind of like a high-level app-level concerns that has nothing to do with divs and spans and whatever. And it's a way for essentially developers to think a lot more in kind of like like abstract terms about UIs, and it works extremely well. But I'm really excited to talk about the next thing very briefly. I just went to React Europe conference last week, and this guy Vincent Reamer introduced another library. It's called React Native DOM. I know this name gets very kind of complicated. But the idea that like we are now getting the first hints of like true universality in React applications, in that you can literally take a React Native application, anything that I've written about 10 of them now as a consultant, you can take any of those and you can run them in the web browser. And because the PWA, because like web APIs that we have currently for push notifications, for offline support, like we can actually start creating applications that is truly like a single application that runs on multiple platforms. And I've always been a strong proponent of the web, but web development has always sucked. And that's why, you know, like the native development has kind of like caught on in you know, last few years, you know, partially because of the marketplace, partially because, you know, apps are differently monetizable, they have different user experience, but there's no reason that those apps need to come from the App Store. In the future, I would like our apps to come from the web. I would like to go to the URL, I would like to start using the app, and I don't care if it comes from the App Store or whether it can be monetized. I care it having a native user experience. And React Native DOM is truly the first kind of like step towards a kind of universal app platform, and it's all based on React. And the very, very final React thing, I promise we're gonna, you know, like get out of this React hole. Another thing that was just released at React Europe conference is Airbnb's tool called Lona. So if you use Sketch, Lona is basically the same as Sketch, except that it actually creates React components, but not React components just for the web, or not even React components for React Native. It actually creates, you know, Swift files for iOS and Kotlin files for Android. So you don't actually even use React. You don't actually even use any kind of framework. What you do, you have a single abstraction, and that abstraction happens to be a React component file. But you can essentially, you know, create truly universal interfaces, and we can forget about frameworks altogether. And this is me trying to make the obvious point here, which is that this is no longer about React, but all those things that we were talking about earlier, all those models about composability, that future forwardness, that is all like going to be true even in a future where React itself as a framework doesn't exist, because the ideas are there. So those ideas is what I'm here to talk about. And I wanted to spend the last 5 minutes talking about how can we write code in a way that is future forward, whether it's using React, whether it's using anything, whether you're not even like a front-end developer necessarily, but whether you're like working in an environment where you have found a productive tool set that you enjoy working in, and you want to make sure that the code that you write doesn't actually snap under the weight of change, but it's something that you can keep incrementally modifying, incrementally adopting new innovations and new tools into your stack. So basically, how can we make sure that we have peace and prosperity for the longest possible time without another revolution? So I'm going to keep this super high level. I'm really happy to talk about this after the fact if there's something that I don't go enough detail into. So the first idea is exactly the same as composability, but when you look at it from model of any program, it's like building bigger things from smaller things. It's very, very simple rules, avoiding monolithic architecture. Even though Angular 4 or 5 or whatever they are right now, I mean, it's a much better tool than the initial one is. I don't think it's here to stand for the long term because it makes exactly the same mistakes as the AngularJS, the first library, did. I don't think it has any more chance to actually survive in an environment where new innovations happen. What happens when new programming languages become to fore and you have still this string templating thing? What happens, you're essentially using all things that are not not core to the platform. Anyway, I'll get more to that in a bit. I think the most important thing about writing future forward code, we get taught in school or wherever you learn to program, that you should make code that is easy to change, which is total bullshit. Code cannot be changed; it can be only broken. But here's the thing: you can actually write code that you don't change. You can write code that you can delete, and you can also write code that you can copy from one place to another. This idea of abstracting things and keeping things dry and whatever, these are really, really good ideas, and they are appropriate at a certain level. But our primary purpose, I think, as software developers, is to create software that actually can be used for its purpose for a long time. And I personally don't believe that code ever will be changed in a way that will make it work. I think the code should be deleted and started again. But if you're building from very, very small pieces that are composable, that have defined interfaces, you can delete them and you can start from scratch and only lose 0.0001% of your code base and not all of it. I think the one key thing that took me very, very long time to kind of grok on my own career is that code should really not be written for machines. Computers don't really care about the code. They don't have feelings. They don't have any kind of there's absolutely no point optimizing your code that does not need to be optimized to please the computer. What matters though is documentation. What matters is interfaces. What matters is taking the time to craft an abstraction that actually makes sense to the user. And the user is not the computer. The user is the other developer who's maintaining that code. So very simple rules again, like express intent, not methodology. Very simple with declarative programming, this is already what we do. Name, document, catalog your code. If you have components, whether they're React or Ember or whatever components, create a component library for them, because actually the other users of that code are going to be humans, and they're going to have blaze a library where they can pick that from. My personal battle. I'm sick and tired of people writing DSLs. I'm sick and tired of people creating these kind of abstractions whereby they think that they are like so smart that they want to create a special snowflakey kind of thing, but also that they think that they can do better than the VM in the browser or whatever environment. So write code that actually is close to the language in terms of language features, but also stays close to the language in terms of the idiomatic way of doing that. Because what you can then do is if you, for example, have components that are just functions instead of components that are these massive pieces of glued in different technologies. When new tools come around, whether the tools are developer tools like Prettier or Babel or whatever, or these amazing new advancements like Prepack, and if anybody's heard of this, but it's an advanced optimizing compiler. You can actually use that for all your code if you haven't gone and decided to implement your own thing. So the generalized way of saying that is don't reinvent things unless you have to. I believe that stability is a value unto itself because change causes work and it causes waste. And in the worst case, it causes an extinction event for your library or for your application or for your business. So if you're maintaining your code, whether it's internally or externally, deprecate before breaking. Use things like code mods. If you don't know what code mods are, ask me later. That make your tool code easier for other people to adapt to and for you to adapt to the use case that they're meant for. And also let's not go back in the day where you're just picking the new hottest framework because it happens to be the new hottest framework. Do things in a conscious sense that you want to maintain the stability of your code base, because that actually in the long term reaps us the benefits instead of the obsessive switching. But that said, the final rule is corollary to the previous one, which is that new ideas can be really scary, and change in general can be really inconvenient. But occasionally these revolutions are necessary for change to take place. So if, for example, if you look at the React ecosystem, what we're talking about in that ecosystem right now is okay, do we even want to use JavaScript? Maybe we should use something like ReasonML. But okay, so that doesn't actually break anything because you can still interop with your JavaScript and ReasonML components. That's fine. But one of the things that a couple of people have talked to me today about is WebAssembly. Where is that going? It's what is going to be the role of WebAssembly in the future? We don't really know. I'm personally not of the opinion that JavaScript developers or app developers in general should be that scared about WebAssembly, because nobody actually wants to write UI app level code in Rust or C or any kind of low level language that runs in WebAssembly. But there is a future that we can't see. So this is why this is called the present future, the future that I can currently envision. And in that future, we need to be able to have these strong opinions that we have. As engineers, that's part of what we're paid for, is not only to do the programming, but also advise and to make technical decisions. And we need to have those opinions, but we also need to be able to hold them loosely enough so that we don't get kind of sidetracked on the path of innovation. So I don't know. This is, I think, where we live right now. I'm honestly of the opinion that I've never been more productive as a developer than I am today. If you look at tools like ReasonML, which is a programming language that compiles down to JavaScript among other things, I think these kind of things are actually going to help us jump through a few of those revolutionary hoops. They're going to essentially make they may seem like new things, but they're actually things that are going to keep us exactly in that path of productivity where we are today. And if you look at things like VR or AR, I don't know how many people here are actually considering those as significant parts of their daily work today. But like more and more that like those different modalities of user interfaces are going to take over. In 10 years from now, I can guarantee you that we will not be, like as our primary UI, we will not be using a laptop computer. I don't know what we'll be using, but it's not that. So change is a constant, and tools like React can really, help us, like stay relevant throughout this thing, and that's why I love that particular tool. But whatever the next thing is, whatever the next thing that we need to jump on is, I look forward to it with a mix of kind of excitement and trepidation. I don't know. This thing doesn't have an ending. Oh my God, it's gonna keep on going. I don't know what the ending was. I think the ending was that this was a bit of a ramble, but I think that the ending also here is that like think deeply about the tools and the methodologies and the things that you do. I think programming is so often generally kind of McDonald'sified these days. I think the kind of like craftspersonship of our work, like shouldn't be like a production line thing or like a device for the capitalist enterprise. It should also like be about reflecting about your own work and about like what we do together. And that's why I love coming to these events like this, because you always end up having exciting conversations and like meeting minds. So hopefully I've sown like one or two ideas to your minds here. If I haven't, I'm sorry. My name is Jani. I'm on Twitter. I often post jokes, sometimes also real content. I work at Formidable. Yeah, we think about JavaScript a lot. Thanks.